Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Elbows Up episode version of Inlay Terms. We're starting a little bit early. I got my good friend, Mr. McIsaac, here, and I thought I'd give him a few minutes all to himself. How's it going, Peter?
Well, out here on the East Coast, buddy, a lot of people are still in shock. I got to tell you that. Even though they went red, a lot of the races were really close. And the mysterious thing about it, some of the ones that where we had conservatives leading by a couple thousand votes got called at 1:30 in the morning out here after everything else had been settled hours earlier, and mysteriously the Liberals won. So go figure.
It's shocking. I'm used to usually the conservatives are behind, and then they have a magic win at the end. Yeah, unheard of.
Not with Carnage Carney and his team pulling the strings this time, buddy.
Yeah.
Anyway, just
So,
saying.
Peter, let's talk about before we went live. You were talking about New Zealand, Australia, and they're freaking out over Canada.
Yeah, it's not just them. It's the UK. It's a bunch of countries in Europe. What they see happen here is happening there at the same time. So for any of your folks who don't know what I'm trying to think of the name of the tactic that Carney's using. It's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. Do you know what it is, Payman?
I know what context to use it. I could never describe it.
So the Cloward-Piven strategy was set up by two people, Frances Fox Piven and her husband, Richard Cloward. And they were philosophers of some sort at a university in the 1960s. And together they hatched a plan. So without firing a shot, they would be able to subvert a country or any democracy and destroy it totally from within by overwhelming the system with welfare payments or any type of socialist payments. And that would collapse the system to the point where the country would be buried in debt that they couldn't recover from. And then they'd be able to bring in full socialist programs and people would be crying for them because the economy would have collapsed. And Barack Obama started to initiate the Cloward-Piven strategy in the US while he was in. But Mark Carney, it turns out that his wife, her aunt, is Frances Fox Piven, one of the people who wrote the Cloward-Piven strategy. And there's 8 sections to the Cloward-Piven strategy, and Mark Carney, beginning in 2019, has been involved in all 8 of the strategies. And this plan has been laid out beginning in 2019, and this is just the final stage of a soft coup.
So for the audience, I want to bring it back. Like, this is not just academic. If you look at Pierre Trudeau in the 70s, 72, he gets a minority government. The NDP leans on him, basically what they did with the Sun, to massively increase the government spending. And housing, it went from like about $20,000 a home in the 70s to $120,000. So now whatever money you had in the bank, like the people that retired, the World War II generation, their savings get wiped out with this inflation. And now the government has to step in and say, all right, we have to, we can't let these elderly suffer. We have to help them. And the cycle just gets worse and worse.
So let me add this to the mix, Payman. Is Mark Carney has already publicly stated that he's going to bring in something called equity fairness. And equity fairness, in his mind, is going to be a capital gains tax on the sale of your primary residence. So, give you an example. Down here where I live, just outside of Halifax, back in the mid '90s, you could buy a house for $120,000. That same house today is between $600,000 to $800,000. So technically, on paper, you now have equity of over $500,000. And if you're charged at your capital gains tax on $500,000, you're going to be looking at a $150,000 tax bill when you sell your house to the federal government. And the government has already done the research. And anybody that just filled out their tax return will note that the government wanted to know, do you own your home? How much did you pay for it initially? What's the value on it now? Because all the numbers are being crunched. And the federal government under Carney, if Canadians want to be grateful that they don't have a majority yet. So they haven't bribed enough NDP and other party members to cross the floor. But I can tell you right now, from being involved in politics, those discussions are ongoing as we speak. What do we need to do to get you to cross the floor? We'll offer you whatever you want so that we can shore up a majority government. And so what will happen is, if they end up with that majority, the worst thing that's going to happen won't be those taxes. But those taxes, that'll wake up the boomers that just screwed over the entire country by voting Liberal. The biggest wake-up call is going to be Bill C-63 will be pushed through. It's at the very top of Carney's agenda. Bill C-63 means you won't be doing this anymore, and for sure I won't be sitting here talking to you. I may see us off someplace, where they decide to haul us away, but Bill 63 allows people to be charged for thought crimes. All somebody's going to have to do under C-63, and they're going to have a snitch line where somebody could say, look, I'm concerned that Payman Ascari is going to say something that might hurt my feelings, and a tribunal will come after you, and they get paid up to 20 grand, and you can get, if it's hateful, you may end up getting a life sentence in Canada under Bill C-63 for a hate crime that you haven't committed yet. It'll be a thought crime. People need to go and read Bill C-63 and realize that's number one on the bullseye for Mark Carney.
Yeah, Peter, I can't deal with Bill C-63 right now. So let's go back to the other thing about the equity tax that they want to introduce.
Yeah.
What they've done is they've financialized the economy. So you have two parallel, you got people living in two different worlds. You have the people that actually produce, let's just call it the farmers and the factory workers.
Yeah.
And then you got the people like you and me, that's as an example, we're buying homes and stocks, and inflation inflates the value. Well, if you operate in that world of financialization, the equity tax kind of makes sense. I mean, if you assume inflation is a good thing, you're offsetting you're basically offsetting the inflation, and the whole thing just keeps going. But the people, like, what I'm asking is, what's going to happen to the real economy? We don't have a real economy.
It's going to be gutted. It's going to be a collapse. I'll give you an example. Down here in Nova Scotia, we pay the highest taxes in Canada, period. And for example, our premier came out yesterday in a news report, and he said, "Look, I didn't like Pierre Poilievre. Really didn't want him to win, and I'm more in line with Mark Carney. And it's time for the Conservative Party to do some soul searching." And basically, what he's saying is the Conservatives need to stop being conservative. Tim Houston is basically he's a liberal. He's a Manchurian candidate, and I know that because I used to take him fishing, and I helped put him in power till I realized, wow, we just put a Manchurian candidate in power, and I'm partway responsible. So I'm trying to clean up the mess down here if I can. But what's going to happen? My wife and I, we did our books here about 2 months ago, and we've lost here in Nova Scotia 37.5% of our purchasing power since 2019.
What?
37.5% of our purchasing power is gone in Nova Scotia since 2019. I'll tell you the reason why. I worked inside government for 29 years, and I was union, and our wages have been frozen for 5 years under an agreement. Our premier is he's not an auditor, but he's what do they call that gang of bandits, that auditors, where they come
Accountants.
from? He's an accountant. That's what it is. He's an accountant. And so if our pension fund is not 100% funded, nobody gets a raise. So as an accountant, he makes sure that our fund stays around 99.8, 99.6% funded. That way he doesn't have to give out raises to all the people who put in 30 or more years working for the provincial government, plus, of course, your management. And then as soon as he got elected in the last election, he gave all the MLAs a 29% raise. Even in Nova Scotia, if you're on minimum wage, if they get the current raise the government wants to force on workers and the increase in minimum wage, they'll have gotten a 23% raise. But there's all kinds of Nova Scotians. We've been locked in and frozen since 2019. And basically, well, here's something crazy for you, Payman. I'm a little older. I'm one of them boomers. I'm 67 now. And I took out an old photo album here last week. And in it, I had a 1967 $1 bill. And when I was a kid and put that in there, that $1 bill could buy 10 large coffees. And that $1 bill today can't buy 1/2 of one medium coffee at Tim Hortons. The same $1 bill. And so I look what happened. And when I first started work for the government as a game warden, with 1 year's pay, I could buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with an apartment in the basement overlooking the water for 1 year's pay. That same house right now, over 40 years later, 47 years later, that same house cost 5 years' wages for the same person, even with the raises and stuff. So 5 years' wages for a house that's over 40 years older. And that's what's happening to our economy. And one of the worst culprits of all was Justin Trudeau's dad and some of the stuff that he did. So to be honest with you, I have no idea. I know the boomers thought maybe they were doing the right thing, but they're about to get hammered. They have no idea what's in store for them.
You're talking about this election.
I'm talking about this election. And the other thing that's going to happen, and I just got off a phone, like an earlier phone call with folks down in Australia and New Zealand concerned about what's happening. And it looks like right now that the numbers for Alberta to separate, someone told me that they already accrued them already as of this point today. I'm not sure if they have yet. They only need 179 or 177,000 votes to go to a referendum. That's going to happen. So all the information that I have from every agency that I can, and every person that I've been able to talk to since the election, is that Alberta just opened the door to separate from Canada. And based on the court case in 1998, where Quebec wanted to do the same thing, it's not only a possibility, it's a high probability. And what none of the boomers realize, especially here in Atlantic Canada, if Alberta separates, Nova Scotia is bankrupt within 24 hours. We get 25% of our operating budget comes from transfer payments. All of our healthcare budget comes from transfer payments. We'll be done.
What about Quebec? I mean, where they're going to get their 14 billion?
Well, what they'll do is if Alberta leaves, they have no incentive to stay in Canada. The only reason they stay in Canada is for transfer payments. Other than that, they have zero reason to stay. They'll go off on their own. The problem with them is they're knee deep in what's that? I forget what it's called when they look. Oh, there we go. Hi, Matthew.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good, buddy.
Great to see you, Peter.
We're just talking about the catastrophe called the last election.
Yes.
So I was just going to finish saying that Quebec, they are so entrenched with their taxes, with their tariffs on dairy, poultry, on that particular industry, that they won't move on it at all. It's not open to negotiation. But if Quebec decides to leave because they're not getting transfer payments because Alberta's gone, the U.S. won't tolerate that line of business with them.
No.
So, you know what? I've seen a couple of other countries that said Canada would be way better off is to get rid of those that supply management in Quebec and subsidize them. They'd come out way ahead.
Yes. There's this whole idea. I think it was set up under the Trudeau government, the original Pierre Elliott Trudeau government. And the idea was to protect farmers and manage the supply. And
yep,
we have tens of thousands of gallons of milk being spilled into the earth in Quebec and in Ontario when it reaches a point where their quota is exceeded and they have to just dump the milk. I mean, it's bizarre. It doesn't make sense.
So I was saying, Matthew, we just got off. I was on a phone call here earlier, talking with folks in New Zealand and Australia who are highly interested in what just happened here in Canada.
Yes.
And everything about the conversation was what's going to happen in Alberta now. And I was explaining to Payman that down here in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada, if Alberta separates, we're bankrupt within 24 hours. We get 25% of our budget in Nova Scotia from transfer payments.
Yes. I saw the PEI, the CPP contribution is just massive coming from Alberta directly to Nova Scotia.
So,
sorry, I just have a question, and Sue, we'll get to you. Hello, Sue, we'll get to you in a second.
Yep.
How is this a functioning country where one of your provinces can't function without subsidies? Like this is a third world country.
No,
fair state.
I mean, what it is it's a socialist model, really. I mean, the United States they have some very limited amounts of transfer to the poorest, places. Okay, so like Tennessee, I think, and is it Tennessee or Mississippi, something like that, way down the south. I think there's two that are getting money from the federal government, which is essentially coming up from the population of the whole country, going in to help those two poorest places. That's a moderate, little intervention. It's not much, but what we have in Canada is this is the whole across the Canada. There's massive amounts of money being transferred, and how long can that go on, right? I mean, it was interesting. Only a few years ago, before this COVID thing hit, I remember that there were some people commenting, some political minds and economic minds saying Canada's the country that shouldn't be. It's just shocking that it works, And this is before 2019 or so, because we have such disparate groups across the country, and that, as I understand, that's why they made the provinces sovereign, and then they created the sort of federal government above it. But they have a lot of power because we have different groups of people, right? I mean,
Exactly.
Newfoundland, you have the fishing, and Nova Scotia, maritime stuff, as well as other stuff, some agriculture stuff, and then Quebec has got its own thing going on with lots of resource extraction, but also all kinds of other industries. And Ontario used to be a lot of manufacturing, that's quite limited. You get into the West, and you've got all sorts of resource economies going on. Massive breadbasket of North America up there in Saskatchewan. I mean, it's huge amount of wheat production and such. And then in Alberta, you've got all these other industries, and particularly tourism, but also oil and gas like crazy. Minerals and then, of course, BC is a similar thing. Lots of minerals and some oil and gas, but mostly a huge place for fishing, and as well a huge place for tourism and skiing and all these kinds of things. So you take all these different disparate groups, and they come from different countries. I mean, you got the British, and then you got the Quebec from the French, and then Newfoundland was its own country, descended from a whole different group of folks. Out in the Nordic countries, right? So
Irish.
Yeah. Thank you.
So here's how we're going to do it. There's actually might be more people jumping in. I'll take mostly a back seat. If I find too many people are dominating the conversation, I'll throw it around. Cool. But I guess to get started, the conversation, it started with Alberta, and we're talking about what's going to happen if they separate. Stu, your thoughts first, then Jamie, and then we'll open it up.
Wow, that's like, a really simple, quick subject we can cover really quickly. I'll say this, though, and hi to Peter from Nova Scotia, here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I want to bring you back, if I could, to the 1979 budget of John Crosbie. Do you remember that one? Do you remember how the government fell? I don't know if you recall, John was the finance minister, and Joe Clark was the prime minister.
13 cents on gas.
Yeah, if you remember, though, if you go to what it was, just think about this for a moment. They put up 2 tax credits. They were actually progressive tax credits, where they'd allow you to take your interest on your mortgage and get a tax credit for that, along with property tax. And the idea was, guys, believe this or not, so young people could afford a home and we could drive the construction industry. So that's what they did. That was the legislation that was on the table at the time. They also did something else. They said, foreign oil independence is ridiculous. We have Alberta, and we need to pump the money that we spend on foreign oil into Alberta. And we need to build massive plants out there so that we can process the crude and refine and build a big industry. That's what was in that budget back then, if you can imagine. And let's build the trades, because it's really good to have a good trade space. Mm-hmm. It's really good to have that in place, because we really need to do that. Let's control that deficit spending. Let's get that debt down. And that was the budget that got tossed out and lost them the government. That budget at that time. So if you think about that, just think about where we are now. That was 1979.
Yeah.
And what I remember so critically, John being a Newfoundlander, of course, and in Newfoundland and Labrador, we are the richest piece of geography per capita in North America. We are hydro rich. We provide 40% of the cobalt to this country. We are the fishing basket of the world. We are mineral wealthy, iron ore wealthy. I mean, we are just one big wealthy mass. And Newfoundland and Labrador is fabulous on that side of things. And it was only this year that we got equalization. We've been off it for about 15 years.
So, do you remember back that my understanding was that Joe Clark
gas offshore.
Whoops, sorry. So, do you remember that Joe Clark wanted to add a 13-cent per gallon tax, and that money was going to go so that we had no national debt at all? That was in that budget as well.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was phenomenal. The budget itself, if we were to look at it today, we'd all be very happy people. There was a real, and the other big item on the list, if you remember, Peter, was that they wanted to decentralize the powers and put them back out to the provinces. They wanted the provinces to have more responsibility.
Yeah.
And what they were going to do with that was allow all these smaller provinces to build what was available for them to build so that they could form populations that were reasonable to their resources and reasonable to what their, well, we'll say expectations were and what their growth potentials were. But they were going to put it all back out to the provinces and decentralize the government. That was what that budget was. So I think about it in today's context and I look at this, I shake my head. You know, we were there in 1979. We knew what the problems were in 1979. And to prepare for the future so that young people would have a better and good future. That's what that budget was all about. It's phenomenal how that happened.
I can agree 100%.
What happened with that? They lost the election on that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they booted him out on John Crosby's budget. And it just, I mean, you think about it now, that was kind of what I think was the catalyst of the pure neoliberals coming. Here they come. Everything is going to be more centralized. Everything is going to be more welfare-based and take it away from provinces' responsibility and their own rights and their own ability to build to actually move forward Canadians' strong industry. And Alberta was particularly mentioned. I mean, they said, we're going to stop buying foreign oil. We're going to pump this money into Alberta. We're going to let it refine. We're going to let her go and do the things it needs to do. And I think about it now. And that was, like I said, that was John Crosby. So he was our representative, our minister in the House of Commons at the time. And, you know, I was in my first year of university when that happened. I remember it clearly. It was, you know what it was? Like, it was like a really positive message. And it went down in the blaze, and primarily from Ontario. So away we go again, because the Conservatives were strong in the Maritimes at that time, Peter. They were strong there.
So the Liberals mounted a fear campaign over the 13-cent tax, and that's what the whole election revolved around, and that's what they ultimately crashed them. No one was willing to pay an additional 13 cents, and that wasn't a liter, that was a gallon. 13 cents a gallon. And all that money would be applied directly to the debt, and we would have walked away completely debt-free.
Wow. Oh yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was seen by many economists at the time as being very, very progressive, a really positive budget. You know, it was just bang on, and it was just so. And you're right, because every time a conservative is putting together something good or something really conservative and moving the country forward, the Liberals will find a crisis. And whether it's the GST, remember that? I mean, the GST, the boogeyman, or free trade, the boogie free trade, everything. They've always got a fear message. And at that time, you're right, it was putting up the tax on gas. And look at where we are now.
Let me tee up the question for Jamie. She's been waiting. It's always a tough act to follow, Sue. What is it about liberalism or the Liberal Party that just refuses to acknowledge the sovereignty of the individual? Like everything has to be about the government. Are you here, Jamie?
I am. It's just my screen refreshed right in the middle of your question. So
it wasn't a very good question. How's it going? Speak your mind.
Your question to me was what I thought of Alberta separatism, and you said we'll go to Sue first. So why don't I speak my mind on Alberta separatism? First of all, I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't. I do see Danielle Smith standing up, getting sovereignty, getting her way, because there's no way that Mark Carney is going to let Alberta go. Okay. And she'll have much support, not just from Alberta, but across the provinces. Yeah, she'll get support from the Western provinces, but likely not from the East. So she may not get the support she needs to separate. So I don't think it's going to happen. But I do see her standing up and taking control and fighting the government on a constitutional basis so that she can drill baby drill and get her way to do that.
I thought it was the rest of Canada did not have to. I mean, actually approve a province that's deciding to exercise its right to cede, not to cede, but to exit. Are you saying that in fact it requires some sort of a majority or 3/4 or something from the other provinces?
If I'm not mistaken, Sue will correct me. I think it's 7 other provinces that have to agree to the separation. And in my 6 provinces and 1 territory then.
Yeah.
So it's a total of 7.
Because of the
6
court case in
provinces.
1998, it opened the door wide open for them, Jamie.
Is that when it was established that number was the number?
Yeah, that was the Supreme Court. Quebec wanted to do a referendum in 1998.
Right.
They almost won.
Yes, I remember the 0.5 percentage point thing, which I found a
Right.
little.
So what ended up happening was Supreme Court laid out a new framework, and the 6 provinces, they have to negotiate in good faith. And my understanding, even as we speak right now, I think Alberta just passed the 177,000 signatures that are required for them to have a referendum to begin the process. And if they begin the process, because Danielle Smith doesn't have an option, she was basically told, you go along with this or you're going to be replaced. And then that opens the door to straight up negotiations. There's a whole bunch of things that have to be figured out. But these 6 provinces can't just say, no, we're not hearing it. They are now bound by case law and that Supreme Court decision where they have to sit down and negotiate in good faith, and they cannot stop them if they meet all the requirements. And it looks like they're going to have all the requirements necessary.
Yeah.
Peter, let me ask. So you need 177,000 signatures to start the referendum.
Correct.
What is the referendum? You have to get 51% of Albertans?
That needs to be determined, because what they said when they said you need a majority, they didn't define it. So in most cases it would be like 51% plus, but that never got defined. Maybe it'll be a higher standard, but in that Supreme Court case, that's not really laid out. But for example, Carney can't just come in and start making stuff up out of thin air. They're going to be obligated to follow the process, because the process has already been established by Quebec and the Supreme Court, and it's all laid out in front of them. So that opens the door. And the question in the referendum has to be very specific. No shady talk, no ifs, ands, or buts. It has to be lined out. Do you want to separate? Here's what it means. There can't be any guesswork. But I can tell you right now, there's one pile of people out there. I may have to disagree with Jamie on that, but I really think that there's enough, especially the younger people out there that are working, that have said no more, it's not going to happen. It's my understanding that a list of demands was just sent through to Carney. Repeal Bill C-69, lift the BC tanker ban, scrap climate, all the climate policies, open pipeline corridors to the markets, and ending oil and gas emission caps. And she wasn't subtle. If we don't get what we want, we're gone. See you, Jack.
Yeah, I think the confusion comes in what the Clarity Act did, and you're right in talking about it had to be a specific question, and it has to be approved by the House of Commons as a question that would be a legitimate separation question. After that occurred, if Quebec or Alberta was successful, they would enter into negotiations with Ottawa, Indigenous groups, and all other provinces have a seat at the table, because succession would affect all provinces in Canada. So they don't get to say, no, you don't get to. What it is that confuses everyone is that when the negotiations are complete and they've got a package to remove themselves from the country that's acceptable, then what happens is a constitutional amendment goes in for a province to come out, and then that requires the 7 provinces to approve the constitutional amendment.
Sue, sorry, sometimes you...
Agreement by all secession. Can you hear me, Payman?
Yeah, sorry, sometimes your audio drops and I just assume you finished talking.
Oh.
Keep going.
Yeah, so then what would happen then is that the 7 would have to agree with the constitutional amendment for removal. But that's the Supreme Court, everything is kind of laid out there that once they reach an agreement and they've got an agreement for separation, they would not hold back on giving the province that wanted to leave the ability to leave. So yes, it can happen.
You know, yeah, it can happen, and I think it will, because I think that they have a very valid argument that you can't say no to, you know, the federal government and the other provinces can't say no to their demand to drop the green agenda, the whole climate change thing, because that in itself is the root of the problem. As long as they're stuck on this climate change thing, there's no way Alberta is going to be able to have a permanent freedom to turn its taps on. And from the other side, you know, these people, you know, in the Liberal Party that are absolutely convinced by the IPCC. And again, I have to reiterate that the climate change leaders, such as Al Gore and, you know, Kerry and such, they've all made huge amounts of money. And in the case of Gore, he made $1 billion in forming a carbon trading company. And you know, so, and then look at how much money, you know, that, you know, Carney's been making at Brookfield, and we don't know the exact amount because he hasn't done his financial disclosures, but you know, everything that he's proposing so far, well, not everything, but the two major things, the housing thing and the small, not, you know, reactors, modular reactors, both involve Brookfield making a lot of money. So right away, you know, the science is not settled on this CO2 thing. There's a lot of science saying that, in fact, you know, CO2 is just plant food. And yes, CO2 exists, and it's a really good thing it exists. We don't want to get rid of it all. And the idea that man-made climate change is a big thing is really a contrarian position to the solar cycles and the history and the geology of the Earth. But I yield on that. But I just want to say that I can see that being the ultimate sticking point. And there's no way that's going to be accepted by the federal government. There's no way Alberta is going to say no. So it's not going to be resolved, which means Alberta would just separate.
Yeah, I think that's a real legitimate point, Matthew. Interestingly enough, in case people don't know, the Greens lost 38% of their vote in this election. And that should be a telltale sign that people are fed up with the Green agenda. So when Mr. Green starts coming back in and starts spouting this again, I don't think there's a real place for it anymore. That's become clear. That's one of the clear indications I took out of the election and the vote. And you're right also, Matthew, what humans have always done is adapt. You know,
Yes.
a 6 billion year history of the planet. We base our crisis and our going out of our minds over what we're doing as human damage in something that we've only been keeping real records for a couple of hundred years. Geologically, we know the difference. Geologically, we know we're coming out of an ice age, and we're kind of in this phase here now. And you're right. You need the carbon for growth. You need that has to be in our system. And what we have to do is literally adapt to what the Earth is going to do with or without us. And what the Earth is going to do with or without us means that you don't build as close on a cliff that's going to erode to go into the ocean, or you don't go into a floodplain, or you don't do this or that. And so the mitigation, I always look to the insurance companies as to what they want done. And what they want done is they want people to keep themselves out of zones that are no longer going to be protected because of the natural change of the Earth's environment. You know, it
Yes.
gets pretty arrogant, Matthew, when man thinks that it controls this planet in our solar system. You know,
Correct.
if the sun farts, we're done, right? So I mean,
Yes.
like I don't know how we ever get to that arrogance level, but that's where we are.
And to underscore that point, that the idea that stratospheric injection of sulfur dioxide, you know, in the million gallons per year, which is, you know, what they're promising to do to dim the sun, as if that's an appropriate response, which, by the way, if you just reduce photosynthesis by 1.5% continuously, you get crop failures, famine. You know, this is a crazy idea. These people are thinking they can play God. They can't even, you know, look at the state of our medical system and tell me that we've got it figured out when it comes to science, you know, applied science, let alone climate science, which is a brand new thing. But we do know from geologists that it has a hell of a lot to do with sun solar cycles. And the idea that we should go monkeying about with the solar, you know, radiation hitting Earth it's just a lunatic, genocidal idea. It could, you know, literally be a challenge to the human existence. So, yeah, arrogance is yeah, definitely.
Not to
around that.
mention whatever they put in this chemical to spray in the sky, the
It's already being
long-term
sprayed.
effects.
Oh yeah, aluminum oxide, barium oxide, strontium. I mean, it's been measured in the soil 5 to 10 times last year what it was the year before. And what a coincidence that with the soil turns more acidic as well, and only GMO Monsanto seeds grow well in that stuff. So yeah, no, this is horrific, and it's and now to those who thinks I'm talking conspiracy theory, I mean, RFK Jr. has already said he's committed to it, and they're going to stop it. And furthermore, they've identified who's doing it. This is the first time it's ever been known. It's ever been disclosed. It's DARPA. I mean, he says we think it's DARPA. He's confirming everything. Now, Hegsworth is the guy who's in charge of that whole part of the government. So I'm sure he's going to come up with that. And we also have disclosures just in the last week. I've seen stuff that the pilots. The reason why it's been so covert. The pilots they pick are the top Air Force pilots. I mean, these are career Air Force pilots who know all about secrecy. They know how to resist torture if they fall behind enemy lines. These people have been soldiers their whole life, and they are under a code of silence. And it was really good to see about a month ago someone put up a video where they confronted one of them. They tracked them down. They confronted them. And the guy tried to deny everything. And he says, no, I saw your plane. I saw the letters on your plane. We've measured from your plane. And he was trying to deny it all and saying, no, I can't talk. This is really bad. And the comment on these people where they have been so, to become that level of a soldier, you literally learn to follow orders at all costs. And,
I heard somewhere that another benefit to the left of this whole Trump tariff thing, it dominated the news cycle, so nobody is even listening to what RFK Jr. like the good things that he's doing.
Yeah, well, we as long as we have the media, concentration of ownership in the media in the world, particularly in the U.S. and Canada, but and worse in Canada, the payoff to the I'll mention it again. I did a little search and discovered $880 million from April to April, 4 years. Okay. And 100 million of that was the Google tax. They made Google pay money because they were running Canadian stories or whatever. But 780 of that would have been Canadian government money, taxpayer money going to CBC, CTV, Global, Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, major newspapers, some radio stations probably even. So as long as our media is being basically majorly influenced by the government, we're not getting the truth. We're getting propaganda.
If no one's going to jump in,
Peter,
you want?
Guys, so AI might be the downfall of this. Last year, if you go look, Stats Canada right now has numbers about Canada's all the carbon numbers that you need. So with AI, they were able to determine Canada has roughly 318 billion trees. That's known data.
That's right.
And then each one of those trees absorbs on average 48 pounds of CO2. That's across the board. And even if that's high, so that means Canada has the third largest forest in the world. And our forests absorb over 15 trillion pounds of CO2 annually. Well, here's the crazy part. Every industry, every person, everything in Canada only produces 1.3 trillion pounds. It only takes 9% of Canada's forest to suck up all the CO2. We can increase our carbon output by 9 times and not affect the atmosphere. It's absolute scam lunacy in their own numbers.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you're reading that out to people and quoting that, because I actually reposted that a few weeks ago myself. And it's just like, how could you possibly argue for net zero when you're already negative? You are sucking more carbon dioxide out of the air than probably any country in the world. It's lunacy. And particularly when you think about, well, there's other countries in the world that are emitting, way more than we are per capita even. And the idea, and they don't have all those trees. So the idea we need to push ourselves into poverty, which will literally have about zero effect
less than
on
zero.
the global temperature. What it will do is pad the bank accounts of large asset management companies. Anyway,
like Brookfield Asset Management. Actually, Matthew, it'll affect the amount of carbon in the atmosphere by 0.00018%.
Right. Now, think about someone that made the brilliant observation, which was obvious, but these obvious things had to be said. said that if you want to look at the number one pollutant in the atmosphere right now, it's not carbon dioxide. It's aluminum oxide, barium, and strontium being sprayed from these bloody planes.
Yep.
Sue, you wanted to say something?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, and you know, Brookfield, the master of clear cutting, they're my favorite. Carney, the clear cutting expert. Let's go do Brazilian. You know, I wanted to actually, maybe we can segue here. Although I got to say, watching RB driving whatever he's driving is pretty cool. But segueing into Brookfield, here we are 2 days out from the election, and this announcement comes out that Brookfield Infrastructure Partners is looking to invest in U.S. manufacturing operations as companies plan to build new plants following President Donald Trump's tariff plans. Brookfield is looking at providing capital to companies that are planning to bring new manufacturing back to the country, similar to the firm's $30 billion deal with Intel. This is typically going to be for more critical industries such as semiconductors, batteries, and solar panels. And on it goes. And Brookfield head on in 2 days after. And the financial papers decide to tell us a day after the election we're going into recession. And oh, yes, we need, and that our credit rating is going down. Fabulous news all coming out, all while the local media is wondering why Carney's talking to the BBC and the UN and the EU and everything but Alberta and dealing with this crisis that is the worst crisis of our age. And he's done nothing about that. He's sitting on the phone talking to world leaders, and all of a sudden, nationalistic elbows up Carney starts talking about being the global leader. That's what he started talking about today. So here's all the great news today, right out of Brookfield. So what Carney doesn't deliver to Europe, Brookfield will take down to the U.S. Sounds like a good split to me if you're a Carney.
Oh, yes. Brilliant move.
Sue, can I bring up a point in regards to Nova Scotia? Tim Houston, I was talking to Payman before you come on, and Tim Houston threw Pierre Poilievre under the bus yesterday in Nova Scotia and said that it's time to do some soul searching. And Tim is basically a liberal, and he wants the federal Conservative Party to become more liberalized, just so that your watchers, all your audience knows that Nova Scotia has 3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that Tim Houston will not allow to be fracked or using any of the latest technology. He will not. Plus, we have the second largest uranium deposit in Canada, or second only to Saskatchewan. Tim Houston will not allow those resources to be tapped into because he takes the money from Alberta. He doesn't need it. So he's not forced into doing this, and he won't do it because he's trying to buy votes from the Green movement. But the reality of it is Nova Scotia should be energy self-sufficient. We should be paying half what we're paying for power instead of the highest taxes in Canada. And it's an absolute disgrace. I would say if Alberta lose, all of a sudden you're going to see us fracking natural gas in the Muscatawba Valley. I mean, 3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. And basically, a lot of our electric power here in Nova Scotia still comes from coal-fired generators. It's insane.
Yeah, don't forget your coal. I mean, and Peter, that's the thing, world-class coal. Nova Scotia, and that's exactly what Crosby was talking about, letting the provinces with their own power get into the resources that they needed to drive their own province revenue, not coming from the central Ottawa, putting money back out and dispersing it as it collects it as it wants to do. Because you're right, Peter. The driver ambition is not there to do it simply because they don't have to. And I mean, I've got to, your premier. Oh my God. And I remember this. My son was actually living in Nova Scotia when he was elected, and everyone was hoping for some change from with what do we call liberalized? He's absolutely horrible. I'm here, not there. Am I back again, Payman?
Yeah.
Yeah, you always drop out when you're making really, really profound points.
Of course. Such is the way. But that's exactly right, Peter. And you're right, Nova Scotia doing what it does. and even Newfoundland and Labrador not reaching its potential in what it really could be doing, and slowing down on that offshore oil and gas. And we have the sweet crude out there. And there's so many things that could be done. And it's all managed from the center. And what does Carney do? He wants to take more into the center. He wants to have all the housing development. He wants to control everything. Nuclear power, well, of course. Seeing you own Westinghouse, and even Candu, which was purchased by the former SNC Lavalin, Westinghouse services Candu in its refurbishing and maintenance. I mean, Brookfield is all through this, through and through and through. And Carney's whole point in the debates, let's get this nuclear up and running. Oh yeah, let's get that going. That's fabulous. But let's keep that oil and gas in the ground. Let's not bring up the natural gas at all, unless it's Brookfield's pipeline in Alberta, and they would have their little monopoly going along there, which they do right now, and they'd like to hold it. Thank you. Hence, C69. So it's quite a mess, Peter, that we have in this country. And like I said, when I think back to 79, I shake my head. We were almost there.
Well, one of the other points that you make, Sue, is that when I look at Carney and what he's done, all anybody had to do was go read his book called Values. The man's entire existence revolves around what he wrote in that book. I mean, if you want to know about Mark Carney, read his book. You want to know about me, read my book. What people are willing to put in writing, that, people tend not to lie about themselves in a book. Everything the man says, you need to take everything he said to heart. His goal is net zero. Even though we're already there, we got there without enriching himself through Brookfield Asset Management. The other night, almost in Nova Scotia, I could hear the champagne bottles popping from Nova Scotia all the way down to New York at the headquarters for Brookfield. When they declared that the man won the thing, it was like, guys, we're going to get access to pension funds. We're going to have $30 billion in building these new little canister houses that aren't going to have driveways, and they'll be government owned. By the way, all that new housing construction, there's no talk about making that available for ownership. Those are going to be government-owned little gulag-style things.
And don't forget, they're getting access to trillions of dollars of home equity of Canadians. They're just going to take it.
Yeah, they're just going to take it. And we had talked about that. And people don't realize how much it's going to be. I made the mistake of thinking it was going to be 10 to 15%, but it's going to be a straight-up capital gains tax. So you take someone out in BC, right, that 30 years ago paid $100,000 for a home, and now it's worth $2 million. Well, their equity is going to be 1.9 million, and they're going to get hit with a full capital gains tax. So they're going to get nailed at 30%. They're going to lose 1.8 million. They're going to lose, what's that work out to at 30%? Almost 600 grand. I'm going to tell you, when the boomers get hit with that, Matthew, we're going to be filling the hospitals with seniors that had strokes and heart attacks, because it's coming.
Let's go to RB.
Where's my emojis?
We'll go RB and then Jamie. RB, yeah.
You guys are nailing it. So
no emojis here. RB, can you hear us? Going once.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead and tell us what your thoughts are, and then I'll mute you because of the ambient noise.
I want to know what he's driving. Wait, no, Payman. I want to know what he's driving first.
I'm driving in my semi. I'm going up to Meadow Lake to load a load of lumber. So I'm back to my regular job now that I failed miserably as a politician. So I'm going to Meadow Lake. I'm going to be loading a load of lumber at a First Nations owned lumber mill. They stay open until 10, so I'll get there in time, and then I'll be able to boogie back to Saskatoon. They might want me to unload this in Warman in the morning, but I'll probably sleep at the shop tonight. But back at the grind, as it were. But talking about what Carney's plans are for Canada, I think everybody should start investing very heavily in pitchforks and torches, because that's where we're headed. I can tell you right now, eventually people are going to read Mark Carney's book, and they're going to realize what a scumbag he is. The blowback will be awesome, immense, and wonderful to see.
Good stuff. Jamie, do you want to comment?
It's hard to keep up with some of the comments that have been made. It's like, how do you follow that? I personally see Mark Carney as Satan incarnate. I do. There's an evilness in that man's eyes. I can't explain it. A coldness behind him that I can't explain. He is a power hungry. I was explaining earlier today, somebody who's been at the top is used to 100% control over what they do. Nobody really questions them. Yeah, you got your board of directors, but as long as you're making them money, they don't say anything. So nobody questions you when you're at the top. And
The way
he's
he,
used to being there. He's used to being there. So when he gets into Parliament and Parliament reopens, he's going to really be under fire to perform, especially not having a majority government. He is going to have to suck up to those NDP or the Bloc or whomever to get that majority vote every time they want to put something through. As long as they do not have a majority, we can hold them their feet to the fire. So I'm all in on that. I know Two Chicks in Politics is all in on that. And I know if we had emojis right now, Sue would give a thumbs up on that. So that's my position on Carney. That's my position on where we are.
Oh yeah, the Two Chicks special on Sunday. What has Mark Carney done this week? Can't wait to get into that. Let's see. What has Mark accomplished? Our banker, our economist, our credentialist in the world of DEI. What has he come up with for our wonderful nation this week? And and Jamie's right. When he gets into that House of Commons, you remember now, little Mr. Chair of the board and the governor of the Bank of England and the governor of the Bank of Canada. And all of a sudden, he's in a boardroom where everyone's flying stuff at him and they're yelling at him and they're screaming at him. And it's not Mark's cup of tea. So, and he has a little short fuse, I understand, if you listen to the Brits. This guy has a short fuse and he's got a big temper.
Yep.
So let's see what buttons we can press to show Carney in his true environment. But he's a piece of work, and that will come out very, very quickly. But right now, guys, he's challenged. He's got to deal with Alberta. He's got to deal with Saskatchewan. He has got to, and he's already trying to make this work. The Quebecers, as usual, have done two things. They've got one toe over in the governing party, and they've got one toe over in their own bloc, and they're going to manipulate that parliament every which way to get to their constitution, and that's what they want, their own constitution. They want a nation within a nation, and they want it done within a year. And he's got to manage that, manage the West, manage all the mess or outfall of people not getting results. Like they want Mark Carney for them. You're going to fix it up for us. Fuel prices are going to go down. Failed, they went up. Food prices are going to go down. Failed, they went up since the election. They want all of these problems to go away. And to top it all off, he's got to make a deal with Trump. He's got to try to appear to continue to be a nationalist, which he can't hold up much longer. And it's a total mess. He's got so many things to juggle now. Let's see him outside of his comfort zone.
I can add something. We had Leighton Gray on Monday, and he said that the Parliament might not open until October.
I got some note of that today as well. That it could be many months before we're going to see a Parliament, which is the worst case scenario that we heard a few months ago. That Liberals were just going to stretch out the period for which there's no accountability. And this is extremely bad news. And I just want to comment as well, Sue, that the eyes thing absolutely identified by me as well, with Carney's eyes. And I've unfortunately seen those eyes before, and I recognize them, and they're very dangerous. And I'd also like to say that I think that he's already showed his short temper with several mainstream journalists who questioned. Remember the one? I think it was it wasn't a CBC guy out in Alberta when he had flown that jet, off to Europe.
I think it was Western Standard.
Yeah, the Western Standard journalist. Yeah, and he said, "So I'll take that as a no." And he said, "No, you'll take that as a very reasonable analysis." And and then of course there's the female, was it the CBC person who asked him these questions, and he just
Rosie Barton, yeah.
yes,
Rosie.
yes, he is very easy to trigger, and that's a sign, right? And then the intelligence, I mean, that we've seen reading, rumors of what some of his colleagues have said, he is not well regarded by his colleagues. He is used to wielding power and using, coercion, and but the thing is, it's not a popularity contest. Once he's won, I mean, if this election holds, I think at some point we should bring up what is going to happen with this investigation into these testimonials that we've seen. There's at least two testimonials of poll workers that were working in the central actual for the riding, the counting of the ballots, reporting very strange things going on. Like, who's going to investigate that? We've seen, as RB was saying, why is Paul Levere and why are the Conservatives not saying anything about this? Why are they going? We're going along with this. Like, the fact that Pierre lost his seat because of election interference, largely, I mean, it certainly impacted it. We have 91 signatures, all independent people on the ballots. That's a hell of a coincidence for the one guy who could hold Carney to you just put him in his place, and with debate and elocution in the parliament.
I gotta cut in here because I have to say, if Polyev were to come out and say election interference, oh my goodness, that would put everybody over the edge that he really is Trump. Because remember, Trump lost the 2020 election. It was stolen, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to see Pierre Polyev or any of the Conservatives ever say the election was stolen. It's done. It's over. Unless somebody can legitimately prove electoral interference, then this is the cards we're dealt with. And we have to deal with it.
Okay, Jamie's opinion. Matthew, do you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I understand the point that you're making, that they've called it, but I mean, there's a certain truth that's important here. Truth is everything. And if there is election interference, it needs to be, at least the reports that have been made need to be investigated. And so far, there's no politician that's spoken a word about it. Is it, again, now up to the people, to actually investigate these various reports of this anomalous behavior going on in two different ridings where the election was called for them by the CTV and then CBC for their own ridings, and they hadn't even counted the votes. So, I mean, that needs to be looked at and trying to be confirmed if there's something to confirm there. The other thing is, why was there 960,000 estimated return ballots, mail-in ballots? There was like 1.3 million mail-in ballots, the same as 2021, which was in the middle of the pandemic. Before that, it was much less in the previous elections. But this time, apparently in 2021, it was 620,000 of those 1.3 million were actually returned. This time, it's 960,000 of these return ballots returned. So this is really weird because we're not in a pandemic right now. I mean, in the sense of the actual definition of scientifically of the word. So what's going on there? There's enough little weird things going on that I think I thought in a democracy that people would be concerned about making sure these things are looked at. That's all.
Yeah, and just to go kind of in between the two of you, I would say, Matthew, you're right. These things do have to be investigated. We do have to find resolve when there's questions in the electoral process, be it with a conference held because we know there's Chinese interference or any type of interference, anything at all, needs to be investigated at a level. And Jamie's point, of course, that if any conservative talks right now, they look like somebody with a tinfoil hat. That's how they make them look when they talk about the election not being fair. So I think what it comes down to is individuals have to file reports with Elections Canada, and they have to ask for the matter to be investigated. And then I think all parties should come out and say,
Here she goes again. I wonder if she's being tampered with.
The investigation be done to ensure. Oh, where we go. Am I back up or gone? Who knows? Am I back?
You're back.
Payment?
You're back. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So because there has to be resolve, and we cannot let in any democracy any questions of whether it be tampering or interference, or even the thing that we've seen on Pierre's ballot, where this Marxist community comes up and says, okay, we're going to choose to say, well, we didn't get proportional representation out of the liberals, so we'll go target a conservative. That doesn't make sense to me. That tells me that they're fronting for somebody, and I have a problem with that. That whole ballot needs to be investigated. Each one of those need to be investigated. That is really, truly absurd.
Well, not to mention the good investigative work that you two have done at Two Chicks in Politics regarding Protect Canada. Why is there no investigation? Why is I'm hearing that why is the RCMP or somebody saying, yes, we're looking into this?
I have to say you're right on that one, Matthew, because this Protect Canada group would appear, Protect Canada Project, the first round, 2021, Protect Canada this round, 2024. We have to ask the question, how is it this group of people, where we can't track where the money's coming from, we don't know how much is being collected, it's outside of the election period, so it's not filed within Elections Canada. But the key question there for this one is, how did they know there was to be a snap election? How did they know so precisely as to when to start to advertise? The first time it was on Scheer, I think that, or no, Aaron O'Toole, and the second time it would have been on Polyev. And the commercials were essentially the same thing, just with the different name inserted. And the two groups, of course, have common bonds. They ditched their federal corporation, so they didn't have to file the return, and they didn't file it even though they were supposed to. They were allowed to dissolve, as we talked about last night. Then they moved to Ontario, of all places, over with Ford, where they don't have to put out any information publicly on their annual returns. But that to me is a direct election interference, because they seem, I'll say this, without saying somebody told them the date, I would say it's more like somebody greenlit them to start writing, to start running their ads and to start collecting their funds. I think they were given the green light.
And just for a simple phrase for this would be what in the States they would call an illegal super PAC. And what the Americans would do if they found an illegal super PAC, people would be going to jail.
Yeah, they'd be perp walked today. They'd bury them. Sue, one of the other things there too that some people aren't aware of. So on election night, I was on with Wayne Peters from whatsupcanada.org, and we were watching what was happening in the Maritimes. And three very suspicious things happened. One happened in Newfoundland. So central Newfoundland and the west coast of Newfoundland were declared blue within almost 20 minutes after they started counting ballots. And then just north of St. John on that riding there, they didn't call that one till around 1:30 in the morning, and it was back and forth. And when they really, really, really needed seats, the Liberal ended up winning by, I think, 83 points there, even though the Conservative was in the lead most of the evening. And we had two ridings in Nova Scotia that did the same thing. We had Sean Fraser, and he was he was the guy that abandoned the sinking Liberal ship early. He said he needed to go spend more time with his family, the guy who destroyed the immigration file. So Carney went to see him personally. He said, "We need you to run." So he came back in and he ran, and he was losing most of the night by up to 1,500 votes. And then all of a sudden, between 1 a.m. Nova Scotia time, everybody else had long been done for hours with all their data in. And between 1 a.m. and 1:30, all of a sudden, he pulls ahead by 1,500 votes and wins. And the same thing happened with Dr. Steve Ellis up in the Truro area. Like, Steve was ahead by 1,500, and around 1:30 in the morning, all of a sudden, the Liberal pulls ahead and wins by 500 votes. When
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right, Peter. And the Newfoundland instance, that was Eastern Newfoundland, and
Yeah.
we actually took Central, and we actually took the West Coast. The Conservatives took those two ridings, so we were up two. And Anthony Germain, who I know you all want to know this, Anthony Germain, who is the Liberal in question here in this closed seat, just retired. He's just a recent retiree of the CBC here in Newfoundland. But by the way, that seat is by 12 votes, automatic recount. That hasn't been done yet. And no doubt will go into a judicial recount because of the percentages. That one's not lost yet.
Yeah, we lost about 15 seconds, but anyway.
We lost the good parts.
Well, what part did you? Well, it's 12 votes that is separated by. It's gone into an automatic recount, and it will no doubt go into a judicial recount, and that one's not lost. But as Peter points out, this fellow, the other fellow, the conservative, was ahead of Germain all night long. And
All night.
what it came, yeah, and what it came down to in the end, like these mail-in ballots that were essentially in Ottawa. They were in Ottawa. They weren't. They couldn't do the final count in Newfoundland in the districts. The mail-in ballots were in Ottawa.
Okay, so we were wondering what was happening. And then I looked at some people, they were trying to figure out what was going on. In elections, Nova Scotia had their site down for on and off throughout the night. My understanding out in BC, there was one building that had 300 people that were supposed to be able to vote. And they went in because it was a new construction. They ended up not being allowed to vote, and nobody could get through to Elections Canada to get it ironed out before it was voting time. Another area out in BC, one of the women I watched her online here the other day, and a lot of conservatives were coming in with their own pens to make sure that nobody could screw with their votes. And she said, where she was, she said, it was just nonstop people with their own pens. Then it became time later to start counting ballots. She didn't see a single ballot that was marked in pen, not one. So there's all kinds of things that come up. So I got a hold of Dr. Stephen Ellis in Truro, and I think I have to agree with what Sue and Matthew and I think it was Jamie had mentioned, is that a lot of people right now don't want to put their hand up and call it say that they were doctoring it, because I can tell you the press here in Nova Scotia won't even entertain it. I was listening to talk show radio the last 2 days. If you bring anything up at all, you're called a tinfoil hat or straight up. Oh, no, that couldn't happen here. Well, I could tell you, because I was involved in being a scrutineer before, and it can happen. And I reported something that happened inside when I was an EDA president for the Federal Conservative Party, and that ended up getting me kicked out of the party.
Wow.
Well, I'd just like to mention that in the 2020 election, which I'm not going to be, shamed about, that I'm a tinfoil hat wearer. There is abundant evidence of tampering in that election in the United States. And in that, the behavior that we saw was, all night long, a Republicans winning, and then, then they, close the counting, or, there's the coverage stops, and then maybe they're counting all night. And then all of a sudden in the morning, it swung like 180 degrees the other direction. And we saw that there was actual mail-in ballot stuffing going on. That's been recorded on video. There's a whole project. There's documentaries about it. And for Canadians the media to shut them down over this, is it really surprising when the mainstream media, that's, as I mentioned, $880 million in the last 4 years, is benefiting from the Liberal government? Not to mention, and the other thing Canadians need to be aware of, again, I'm going to repeat it, $5 trillion. That's what's at stake. The net zero agenda. And to think that there's somehow Canadians are just, so like uncorruptible. They couldn't possibly take a $25,000 bribe. To me, I think that's just extremely
naive. Closer to $1 million, Matthew. Won't be 25 on this one. There's way too much at stake. By the way, guys, most people still don't know in Canada, in the last, not this federal election, but the last one, 205,000 mail-in ballots didn't get counted. That was enough to turn the election. And you know what Elections Canada said? Oopsie. Hope that doesn't happen again. 205,000 mail-in ballots did not get.
Well, there's no accountability, and no one's paying attention.
Well, there's no transparency and no accountability.
Right, and we have remanded in the room, and as far as I'm concerned, he's top.
I was
going to
go to remanded.
Let's go remanded.
What are your thoughts? Because you've been following this, and you're very careful and calculated in your words.
Yeah, I heard what Sue was saying, and I just got the kids' pool ready with hot water in it, so I'm kind of excited to get in there. Sorry, the kids keep dragging me out there. Anyways, you were mentioning what was it? The mail-in ballots, snap election. Sorry, I have to go back to the parallels. BC being the template. We saw this with the BC NDP when John Horgan was in, And basically, they had made an agreement with the BC Greens, with the Green or the with the Green Party, because they're kind of in the similar situation that they're in right now. And so they made an agreement with the Green Party, and then I think it was about a year. Was it about a year and a half? I can't remember the exact timeline. They were pissed that they didn't have a majority because they wanted to push through their agenda, basically. And what happened was 20, got to get the timeline right here, 2020, halfway spring of 2020, the Elections BC started doing surveys on whether or not the BC residents would be okay with mail-in ballots, and they came back to the 35%. I think it was 35% of BC residents were okay with mail-in ballots, and so their whole thing was, because we had 3 referendums prior, that they would be well situated to deal with mail-in ballots at the electoral level. And so when you actually look at the metrics, if we were to compare Elections Canada with the BC, with Elections BC, Elections BC could actually handle the Elections BC could handle the weight of providing all of the mail-in ballots for the entire country. Like, they're somehow more organized than Elections Canada. So we had our election in 2020. It was a snap election. So as soon as those surveys came in from Elections BC, 1 month later, snap election hits. NDP get their agenda, they get the majority, and off they go. What we saw coming off of that was, Anton Bogman. So it was Elections BC, Anton Bogman, the CEO, and the CEO from Saskatchewan. They sat in front of the House of Commons Procedures and Affairs, and they took questions as witnesses into like what happened, what they experienced, and like their recommendations. One of the recommendations was, should we use mail-in ballots at the federal level? And they said yes. They both agreed that we should be doing mail-in ballots at the federal level. And we're in the middle of COVID, and you see the spike. And oddly, as you guys pointed out, 951,000 mail-in ballots returned in this federal election, which is really strange, because when we think about the BC, I hate comparing them, but I have to. When we look at the BC election, we didn't have that same ratio of requested and sent back. I think we're at about 112,000 requested, where with I think about 102,000 sent back, around there. Maybe it's 84,000. But when you compare that to when pandemic levels, when they sent over 700,000, I think it was like 702,000, and they got about 600,000 back. It's just a weird parallel when you're matching the federal with the provincial. So we should have seen what happened in BC at the federal election in 2025, but we didn't. And so they're just observations. It's not. I'll never claim a thing to be rigged or fraud or whatever, because you need the proof. And if you make the frivolous claims, you just kind of make yourself look bad. And I had one more point, but the kids just distract me and lose my train of thought. But maybe I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Remended. While you're remembering the point, does anybody have anything to say on that? Peter.
Yeah, one of the issues is, guys, I was an investigator for 29 years. And what happens is, when you do investigative work, you have to look at what's called circumstantial evidence all the time. You don't have hard evidence, you just have circumstantial evidence. People go to jail for life on circumstantial evidence sometimes, if they have enough of it pointing in one direction. And so you start looking across the country, and I start looking at, for example, in Pierre Poilievre's riding, they had roughly the same amount of eligible voters as they had over in Nepean. Nepean, they had something like almost a 90 or 80 some % voter turnout. And all of a sudden in Pierre Poilievre's riding, they only have like 57 or 50% voter turnout, one of the lowest ones they ever had. What's that all about? I just go back, I look at circumstantial evidence, and I look at what Stalin said a long time ago. I don't care who votes. I only care who counts the votes.
I will say this.
Exactly.
Yeah, I will say this, Remanded, that I found that the Greens went down in their percentage 38% this election, and although Elizabeth May won her seat, the percentage was likewise down in British Columbia. And I do attribute some of that to the mess that took place in the BC elections. I think something happened with that. There's some very, very strong questions. But you've done phenomenal work. And Matthew, when we think about it, when we're talking about citizens or people getting engaged and wanting something investigated, I don't think there's anything more Remanded can do other than stand on his head and count to 100 to get done what needs to be done in that election mess that was British Columbia. And they've got the receipts, they've got the work done. And what's so sad about that, in my opinion, is that the ones that are least interested in pursuing that to get the real answers are the political parties. And I believe that's all of them, isn't it, Remanded?
Yeah, I mean that's the most troubling thing. It's like, I'm in the DMs with some of them, and I get ultimatums, or, it's too long. Nobody has time to read it, and it's just like that's insane. Because when you think about it, do you want people screaming on social media saying everything's fucking fraud? Sorry for swearing, fraudulent or rigged or tampered with, or do you actually want citizens or an independent investigation to actually spend the time, do the due diligence, come up with all of the references, and actually prove the case? Or do you just want a bunch of fodder in the background? So it just seems absolutely asinine that you're met with resistance. And I kind of attribute that to just how it's kind of been like hyperbolic. But I think one other thing with like the cost, this is one thing people might not know. At the federal level, we actually pay $181 million of taxpayer dollars in non-event. So not when we don't have a federal election, we're paying $181 million. And then that jumps up about 20-30 million when we're actually in a federal election. So, I mean, that readiness is always there. The registry should always be, ready to go. And then I'll parlay that with what I was actually just reading while I was on the kids' swing set today, was the 103,000 non-citizens that were removed, that bumped up to 112,000. I just found the next page. So that figure was May, May, let's just say May 2019. And then, so they removed these 112,000 people. We had the September election. And then following it into February 2020, they reduced it by 38,000. So did the 38,000 get charged? Is there an announcement of fraudulent registration with intent to knowingly vote? Did they vote? How many voted? How many didn't get caught and still voted? We don't know. Why? Because they use these terms, and it's an election talking point. Estimations, roughlies, anticipated, projected, and approximately. And so that statement that comes out saying that they reduced it by 38,000 because they proved that there were citizens. Did they become citizens between the election and the time that they get back to you from the report? Let's be clear with the details here, because I mean that's pretty crazy. And you would think that they would have a list. So like, not to go on too long, but it's just like there's just so much. When you look at Elections BC, they have this report. They just came out with it, not the statement of vote, but the financials and penalties. And so you can see, the 30 people that were penalized, fines and penalties during the BC election for mostly financial stuff. But this stuff is backdated to 2021. So it actually takes 3 years for them to do the investigations to all of these to all this malfeasance that's going on, and it just seems like it just take for what we pay. It just takes too long for that catch up to happen. We're already in the next election cycle before we actually find out that maybe some MPs shouldn't have been elected in the previous election. I'll land it there.
It's interesting what you say about that, Remanded. We're in a case in Newfoundland that goes back to our last election, where two are challenging actually the result of the election. We're now into another election period. We've actually gone through that. However, the court would not rule that moot, and just a month ago said this is going forth regardless, and we are going to find out what happened in this election. We are going to sort this out. So the court did a fine job down here in saying, no, it's not moot. The fact that we're going to be into another election before we find out if the guy shouldn't have been elected to begin with. Actually, there was 2 seats that shouldn't have been elected to begin with. Yeah, the court's going to go through it. They're actually going to go through the process. And everybody tried to block that. But ultimately, the judge said, we're hearing it. We're going through this, and has now set a date. So we'll be into that now in later spring, early summer. So I think, it's important when we get the precedents that way. For some strange reason, Newfoundland does these different things. I love it. Actually, our courts do some pretty good things, and they do some pretty good precedents. We are also the province that locked up 5 members of our House of Assembly because of a scandal on their constituency allowances. They were all found guilty or pled guilty. They all had jail time, and they all had to pay fines, and they were booted out of the House. One was the deputy premier. So if that's the stuff that's got to happen. And it needs to, I don't mind using Newfoundland as the example. For some reason, we get that stuff right. We get it in our craw, and we're going to get it out one way or the other. And, these guys were running around taking all their constituency allowance and buying weird things, and no one knew where the money was going from. Yeah, you remember? I mean, yeah. And guess what, guys? We had an NDP locked up, Liberals locked up, and Conservatives locked up. We did right across the board. Every one of the parties were involved in this scandal. So, but they all got convicted. They were all convicted, and they all had to do the time and the ankle bracelet, and they had to pay back fines. And I tell you, it's refreshing to a population when the courts are holding these people to account, because you feel like your democracy is at least staying intact. And you better watch what you're doing, because you're going to come up and face it. And I think it's an important lesson. And the Remanded, for his part, he's probably done $200,000 or $300,000 worth of legal work. And what they want him to do, instead of being like a confidential informer or a whistleblower, like, no, Remanded, like, we need you to come out and tell us who you are. Expose yourself. Expose your family. Do it all. We want you to expose yourself. Instead of doing it the right way, when you've got information and it's right there in front of you, you take that information, you do your due diligence, and you get it investigated. But Remanded is an example of when they don't want something to be checked, they try to drive the person that has the information, that's done the body of work, out into the open. They put them in all kinds of precarious situations so that people are dissuaded from doing exactly what he's done. And that's pointing out the irregularities and problems in our system.
Sue, I got a funny comment from Andre. Maybe we should move the capital of Canada as St. John's.
Well, here, Andre. I'm for that. Let's do that. That'd be a load of fun.
Okay.
Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the numbers. Okay, this is from Grok, but it gives me the actual sources, the data sources, which are elections.ca and CBC. That the election year in 2019, there were 700,542 ballots sent out. Returned was between 50 and 100,000. So that was in a non-pandemic situation. You have basically 100 of 700, about 15% approximately that came back. In 2021, pandemic panic. Everyone's afraid of this whole pandemic thing, like terrified. I mean, anyway. So you have 1,275,226 exact number. Received back 1,069,333. So basically 1.2 sent out, 1.06 came back, a million. Now in 2025, no pandemic anymore. I mean, we're not doing any camp closures or anything like that. You know, it's not happening. 1.3 million approximately sent out, and 745 to 960,000 sent back. I would like some, understanding of why that's normal.
CSIS is jamming his signal.
Huh?
I don't know.
Probably.
He said CSIS is jamming a signal. I don't know.
Anyway, so that's just the numbers. And again, this is just not. I would call this just I'd like to understand why that is. That's all.
Circumstantial evidence. So I listened to Remanded and I listened to you, Matthew. It's the same thing. Sue, you'd be interested over in Nova Scotia, and Payman already knows this, that in our last provincial election, the snap election, we had a set legislated election for this upcoming July, and Tim Houston went to a snap election in November, and they planned and coordinated behind the scenes to keep 16 or 19 independent candidates off the ballot. And that was that was 19 ridings they were going to do. And we're in Supreme Court now for a judicial review, and we're working on our charter case. There's 10 people involved in the judicial review, and there'll be 19 on the charter challenge. And the data we have right now says that the government will lose all 4 pillars of the Oakes test, and we're going to hold Tim Houston to account. And very likely, the court will find him guilty of malicious intent. And if he's found guilty of malicious intent, he very likely will be forced to resign.
Can I ask you a question, Peter?
Work.
Go ahead.
Peter, how do you think Tim Houston's going to respond to try to wiggle out of that? Like call another snap election? What?
No, first of all, what he's already done, Tim's a narcissist and he can't help but not always try to be the smartest man in the room. So he's already buried himself, because as soon as he got elected, one of the first things he tried to do, he tried to change the legislation so that he's getting rid of the legislated preset election dates. Then he tried to make changes so that freedom of information access will be restricted because we need it for our court case. Then on top of that, he also tried to get the Auditor General. He tried to get the rules changed so that the Auditor General can be fired without cause and only answer to him. Then he also changed the legislation so that I forget the name of the government agency. Communications Nova Scotia was going to be shut down, and all communications have to go through him. And then he went after the only independent candidate that got elected, and has personally advised her that she will not be on any committees at any time for any reason. So what he went and did, we're building a case on circumstantial evidence, and he just added 4 or 5 more pieces of circumstantial evidence to the case, trying to limit our access to data, trying to get rid of the preset election date. But we just put a bunch of paperwork in. We're back in court here on May 13th, Supreme Court in Nova Scotia. And now we have text messages, emails, affidavits. We have everything that we need to proceed. And I don't think it's going to end well. The question is there's enough people involved that they can't really squash it. And we did that in a strategic manner, because if it was only 1 or 2 people, they'd say, oh, well, it's not a big deal. But as an accountant, he conspired with 2 other accountants to make sure that there was a section change in Nova Scotia's Election Act, that we had to be able to find. There used to be a pool of 5,000 accountants that you could get to do an audit after your campaign. And Tim Houston and Elections Nova Scotia, and he's an accountant. In 2001, they changed that to a pool of only 152 accountants. And what happened was that's not enough accountants if you have a bunch of people running in an election. And so of the 19 people that wanted to run as independents, they just flat out, we could not get a chartered accountant to represent them. So there's problems inside the Election Act, but the Section 3 of the Charter says very specifically you can't put a market impediment into people being able to run for office. So when you go into the Oakes test, all 4 sections of the Oakes test we're going to win on, and they're going to lose. And then they're going to be everything from reputational damage, punitive damages, charter violations damages, and very likely we're looking now at going after Tim Houston for human rights violations, because in Nova Scotia, you're not allowed to do anything to impede a person's opportunity to work. And if we win that case as a group, Tim will have to pay out of his own pocket for damages there. I hope it ends his career in politics, because I used to fish with the guy, and he hoodwinked me, and he hoodwinked a bunch of us. And he's one of those guys like Mark Carney. He's got the same eyes. You can look him in the eye and lie to you, and you can't tell that he's lying, buddy. And I'm a trained investigator, and you can't tell when Tim's lying.
I was going to say
Basically,
to
it's
you, he's the one that I actually relate to Mark Carney the most. They both have the same level of charisma, if you know what I mean. But they're both able to lie at will and lie easily, and they are. And Tim is like that. There's no question about that. And they are very similar that way. I would agree with you, Peter. There are great similarities in those two people.
Well, the other thing too, he won't tolerate any questioning of any kind, because everybody in everybody in the legislature that questions him on anything, they go straight under the bus. And they don't just go under, he'll back over you and run over you again. And I've watched him do it to a bunch of really good people. So basically, everybody in the legislature is terrified of them. But to keep them shut, their mouth shut this trip around, after he won his supermajority, he gave them all a 29% raise.
Wow.
You can't make this stuff up, guys. So, by the way, I don't have any suicidal tendencies. I'm in perfect health.
I was going to say, I'll visit you in jail. It seems like you've taken on the government. I want to, in the interest of fairness, I want to go to RB Ham, see what he has to say, and then Jamie, and then I'll open it up for another 10 minutes, and then I'll close the room. Go ahead, Mr.
Hey
Ham.
there, I just wanted to say everybody's talking about their premiers, and I've heard some positive things about Scott Moe, but let's just remember he took a $1 billion bribe from the government to initiate COVID mandates and restrictions. And yesterday I got a notice from CRA that two of my tickets have come due worth $11,200. Scott Moe ticketed me 8 tickets for $47,500 for protesting against the COVID measures in Saskatchewan. And the JCCF, when they represented me in court, weren't allowed to bring in any countervailing evidence and talk about the Oakes test. Well, there was no Oakes test in the COVID cases. They were just whatever public health said was sacrosanct. And if there was any countervailing evidence that there was no reason to call this pandemic, that it wasn't actually a pandemic, they had just changed the changed it. They had just relabeled the seasonal flu for 3 years.
Yes.
And there was no massive die-offs. They lied demonstrably about the hospitals being overrun. They weren't.
Yes.
My wife worked in a hospital. I knew at the time, so I had first-hand evidence that the hospitals weren't overrun. And they were considering, they kept going with the cases, plastering it all over the newspapers to terrify everybody. But all these horrible cases, everybody's got COVID. But what those were PCR cases. And
that's right.
It was demonstrably proven in a Portuguese case that 97% of those positive test results were false positives.
That's right.
So we never got any of that sort of representation in court. We didn't get any of our countervailing evidence in, and it's sacrosanct. And Scott Moe hid behind his public chief health officer, Sadiq Shahab. It's like Justin Trudeau hid behind Theresa Tam, letting them have all the power they wanted. But it was always political, because I'll tell you this, when the Freedom Convoy hit Ottawa and the base revolted against Scott Moe in Saskatchewan and said, we've had enough, your donations are drying up because we've had enough, he, with the stroke of the pen, got rid of all the mandates, restrictions. He didn't go to Sadiq Shahab and say, is it okay now? Are the hospitals still overrun? How's the case count? No, he, with the stroke of the pen, he got rid of them immediately, proving it was political all the whole time. So that's Scott Moe and effort. He basically I got fired from my job because I fought against it. I'm basically trying to bankrupt me. If they can't bankrupt me, they're going to garnish all my, they're garnishing all my Revenue Canada refunds. And right now, for the rest of my life, and they keep threatening to take away my driver's license, which would basically ruin my life because I'm a truck driver. That's why I work for them. So this is the kind of freaking stuff that Scott Moe and the federal government and all these bastards are doing to us at COVID. And guess who stood up for me? Maxime Bernier and the PPC stood up for me. And when I saw this the last election, where all these conservative retards were talking about how Pierre was going to stood up for us, Pierre did nothing for us. He showed up in Ottawa for a photo op when his pollster said it was okay. But as soon as the pollster said, "Oh no, you're getting pushback because they're calling you a Nazi flag waving, sympathizing guy," he immediately abandoned us. Warren Kinsella wrote a op-ed in the Globe and Mail saying that it was right for Pierre Poilievre to abandon the trucker convoy. So that just drove me nuts, because the people that's why we got 800,000 and some votes last time, because the PPC stood by the freedom movement. And then when the freedom movement was successful in getting all the mandates and restrictions lifted, I don't know what, 80% of the people who voted for it said, "Oh, thanks for all that, but we're going back to the conservatives because you can't win and Maxime likes to live in Florida." So I just wanted to say all that, and
Well,
thanks for letting me rant and rave.
No, that's great. Great, RB.
I can mute your mic. Any comments before we go to Jamie? Questions?
Oh, that was really profound.
Yeah, I've got something to say about this, and it's troubled me for a long time, RB. And it's on this COVID situation. Never in the history of our country have we had a situation where the Supreme Court of our country actually should have recused itself from anything relative to COVID. And why I say that is that when the COVID measures came in, they, as a Supreme Court, as an individual institution and body, put COVID restrictions in and mandates for their own employees. They were directly involved in a decision and personally involved in decisions that relate to COVID. So if you're going to go up to a Supreme Court, which is not only agreed with, but remember now, it's a separate institution, has involved itself with the determination of science in its own right, and then in its own right affected the mandates and so on, as we'll call it, as an employer in that case. It is not separated. There's no degree of separation which allows them to hear fairly the other side of this situation. I don't recall anything at the Supreme Court level which would have those judges personally involved that would not allow them to be fair in their assessment. And I believe in this case, it is that. I believe that the decisions that would be made fairly in other circumstances couldn't possibly be made without bias. I think the bias was too strong. I think it was too evident and obvious, and it has bothered me for some time. And so, RB, nothing surprises me with that mess because of the level of involvement of all institutions, including our Supreme Court.
Any other feedback? Go ahead, Matthew.
We were going once back around. Is that, or do I have to?
I wanted to give Jamie a chance. She's been so quiet, poor girl.
Yeah. Could I go and just ask that I private messaged you a link, and I was just wondering if you could just briefly display the link so that it's people can see this, and I'll just read the textual summary of it, and then people can look at it offline. It's a whistleblower speaks out. This is a Jim Ferguson, UK, Freedom Trade International, and he's talking about and this is a testimony. This guy puts his name and his face on camera. Journalist and Elections Canada worker Chris McGee has come forward with a story that could shatter public trust in the democratic process. Assigned to a central ballot verification facility for the provincial election. McGee was tasked with, I think that's wrong.
That's wrong, guys.
Yeah. No. I mean, the word is wrong, because later on he's talking about Carney. So that, I think that was just a word mistake, because there was a list last week. So anyway, he came forward with a story, blah, blah, blah. Assigned to a central ballot verification facility for the blank election, McKee was tasked with ensuring vote integrity. 52 voting locations were due to deliver their ballot boxes for counting. Not one ballot box had ever arrived. So this is a central counting location where all the polling stations in the riding were reporting to. Not one ballot box had arrived. They were there for like a couple of hours. Before a single vote was counted, the election was declared for the Liberals by the mainstream media, CBC, CTV. McKee also exposed how the media is funded and controlled in Ottawa. He's using the same number that I've been using, 700 million. It's actually 780 million. And taxpayer money propping up press corps that are 85 and 95% ideologically far left. The media didn't question it because they're part of it. The narrative is pre-written. What does this mean for Canadians? Election integrity has been compromised. Alberta is now seriously considering independence. Mark Carney's already threatened the use of emergency powers and possibly even military force against any province that resists Ottawa's control. Chris McGee also confirmed it was not Carney. It was Carney, not Trudeau, who pushed the freezing of the peaceful Canadians' bank accounts. Yeah. So the full interview is there.
Let me share my thoughts. I actually agree with Remanded on this. Yesterday, we had a live stream, and I quoted Michael Johns of the Tea Party movement when he was calling out the Republican Party. Like, he said, we're giving money to this party not just to win elections, but it's an institution, and it's their responsibility to come out in a unified manner, get lawyers, investigate, and get ahead of this and control the narrative. Instead, this happened in the US. The responsibility fell to the people, and Donald Trump rallied the people, and they managed to get people mobilized through things like Dinesh D'Souza's documentaries and everything.
Yes.
They got people mobilized, and they prevented the steal. Now it's the same thing here. I support the People's Party. We're small. The Conservative Party is big. They're the ones that are supposed to be spearheading this. If they're afraid to do this because the media might call them tinfoil hat people, okay, I get it. So you're telling me that you want me to give you my money and then you want me to do all the work? But that's what's happening. Like, Peter has to do it, Matthew has to do it, Remanded has to do it, and it's just exhausting.
Well, RB had a very good summary about this yesterday regarding the floor manager comment, RB. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Yeah, he's nodding. It's very unusual that, the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre are not saying anything about the fact that his ballot was obviously election interference. In fact, there was someone who called Elections Canada. I mean, I haven't seen the call, heard the call, but they documented it online and said the poll worker agreed when they called them. They said that is election interference, that you've got 91, names on that list in just that riding. The one guy that could stand up in the House of Commons and do some damage. And then there's this whole thing that we're talking about now. There's multiple, at least two people have come forward that are poll workers in these central stations and are making reports with their names about this. So we just need to have transparency. We need to have this investigated, and I guess if the Conservatives are not going to speak out, that's exceptionally disappointing, and that I guess the citizens will have to investigate it, and then go public on social media about what they find. Anyway, thank you.
Now, guys, that's provided we still have social media here after Carney takes power.
Well,
This
precisely.
is true. This is
Precisely.
true.
For real.
Yes, he's
Assuming arguendo that we have freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Let's go to Jamie. Go ahead, Jamie.
All this talk about Carney, and you're talking about different premiers of different provinces. And, I got to talk about Dougie Ford. Oh, my God, that man. Now, all of a sudden, it's all bail reform and law crackdown. And, we had the Toronto Police Association on Two Chicks in Politics. And they were and have always been very clear about the catch and release program and how bad the crime statistics are. And one of the crime statistics that Clayton gave us was 80% of the guns that are used in criminal activity are illegally obtained. The other 20% have the serial numbers ground off them. So why would anybody grind a serial number off a gun unless it was illegally obtained? It was a stolen gun or shipped in from somewhere, God knows. So basically 100% of the guns are illegally obtained. There are no law-abiding citizens out there shooting people. So here you got the liberals that want to take the guns out of, the good people's hands and put it into criminals, because criminals will always get their guns. And finally, Dougie Ford is standing up for the Toronto Police Association. So why do you think that is? Is he looking for at a run for the leader of the Conservative Party? Do you think that that's where he's headed? Or is his head too big right now after winning a majority that he's going to puff up his chest and demand some action? Because up to this point, he's shown he's liberal all along. So what's his motive? What do you think?
Well, I mean, Jamie's right. When we had Clayton on, and I've got to say, he's got to be one of the in my lifetime one of the interviewees that was very, very open. He took criticism on the chin. He took on behalf of his members, because he represents obviously the boots on the ground members. But he was very clear that the liberal policy on bail, the liberal policy on parole, was just absolutely causing people to die. I mean, he was abundantly clear, and there was no holdbacks from him. I mean, he took questions right across the board. I found him quite good, actually, because he was willing to do that. But and then they came out during the election and they gave full support to Poilievre's crime policy. They came out and said, yes, we'll support that. We will not support the liberal policy. And it doesn't seem to matter. And Jamie's right. When Ford came out today on bail reform and stuff like it's just unbelievably stupid and outside of his jurisdiction, but that's okay. He's going to bring it inside his jurisdiction or something. I'm not sure. He's doing his own thing, as Doug usually does. But it's a really sad reflection. And when we have an election ongoing, and you have a woman whose face is beaten to a pulp in British Columbia, literally beaten to a pulp, from somebody who was out on bail after assaulting a police officer. So, here, this is great, right? I mean, it's fabulous. We have no idea yet fully on what's going on in the BC drive-through, mow through the crowd routine there, killing a youngster, and why this individual, who apparently was in contact with police the day before that, and in some sort of mental duress or whatever it was, mental duress or not, the public has to be protected. And this is something that's become so abundantly clear. And Carney is actually going to have to do something about it. And Payman, forgive me for segueing, but I have to say, Carney has done something. Now, I just want everyone to set the backdrop. We are in the crisis of our lifetime. Canada is going to be annexed. Take Trump at his word. This is the worst crisis, but he's actually taken a move today. What he's done is he's announced that Canadians aged 55 to 64 can now apply for the dental care program, and in the coming weeks is going to be open to Canadians aged 18 to 84. And meanwhile, Loblaws is saying, guys, because of the price competition from the States, the Buy Canadian program isn't going to work anymore. So two of those things just happened. And we have, this is the update on Carney activity. He's expanded the dental program. Not the crisis fix, but nevertheless, the dental program. And now Loblaw says Buy Canada is losing because people are buying competitive American products.
So I imagine that some NDP candidates are going to cross the aisle because they got what they wanted, expanded dental care.
Correct. No, you know exactly where that's going, Payman. Yes, they are. This is a whole manipulation. You know that.
Peter, what were you saying?
Well, it'll be a backroom deal, and somebody will have a numbered account somewhere, have a large deposit go into it. That's the way that works. I mean, I was involved in politics for 12 years. Do you want to know how that stuff works? I'm just telling you. It's like when contracts get awarded. Someone somewhere.
Peter, I
was
working
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was working in the Middle East before my whole political venture, December 2020. I was working in the Middle East and I saw all of this stuff. That they had a ministry of bribes and they recorded the bribes as on the way up. So who it came from, but never who it went to. So that if you tried to blow the whistle, they'd say, "Oh, you gave a bribe. We don't know to who." But like, like if shit rolls downhill. And then I come back to Canada and I'm like, this is starting to resemble the Middle East.
Yeah, because when I was involved in provincial politics, I had people come to me offering projects and they wanted a 10% cut. They said, just price it in and make sure that somebody gets paid. Right. So the reality of it is that people think this. All I can tell you is about politics about this. However bad you think it is, multiply that by about a factor of 10. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you think with the amount of money on the line that Brookfield Assets is looking at, billions and billions of dollars, that if they had to drop, for example, $1 million on each NDP, just get them to start crossing the floor, that's coffee money for them. People have no idea the level of what's happening here right now. Like, there is so much money at stake. Like Carney's looking at, he's a multi-millionaire now, but he's going to walk away after 4 years in Parliament as a multi-billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Exactly.
I'll say this, Matthew.
Well, he was on the board of 21 different companies, guys, just that we know of.
That's right.
Matthew was right earlier on the trillions. And the way and the way I see this going down, Matthew, and this is very, very bad, actually, because we all know that the major American banks pulled out of that. Canadian banks pulled out of that. Governments have pulled out of that. And this green that Brookfield does still have significant investment in had to be transferred. Like, they've got to move some money. They've got to move some assets and investment. And hence, the colonial pipeline and getting into the nuclear and this and that. But there's a ton of money left to be lost here that they're trying to save in the interim and trying to move around and manipulate. And I think you're exactly right, Matthew. This is the real underlying factor, and Carney's got to try to deal with that. And it is, it's set up to be done. But you're right. That's what's on the line right now for these people.
Yes.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but during the election campaign, didn't the Governor General sign off on over, was it 400 million or was it actually $4 billion in expenditures with no oversight of any kind?
Well, that's correct.
Most of the expenditures covered were ones that were, we'll call them, already approved or operating. Okay. But there were those funds within that had no approval whatsoever, and she just allowed it to go straight through, which is.
Are you talking about what happened a couple of weeks ago?
Yes.
Yeah, when interim funding supply, right?
It was 6 weeks. 6 weeks of funding.
Right. Didn't it go for BS stuff like museums and transportation to buy votes?
Yeah, there's some things that you would say, well, there's some that was not even approved. There's some that had nothing to do with the regular operational costs, which any government can do on the interim, go and get it signed off should something be delayed. Remember now, they prorogued, and you guys are talking about them coming back in October. They're going to be very hard pressed not to do a throne speech in a budget right now. The budget is going to have to come down. They're going to have to come in before October. There's too much that has to be approved. Like, he's out there spending money again there now. He's going to have to bring in a budget. A budget's going to have to come. I think this is going to be the tricky part for Carney, what this budget is going to look like and how he's going to steer the funds. Remember what he called deficits? No, they're not deficits when I do them. They're investments. So, he's got his guys to do investment deficit. Yeah. I won't do anything. The operational budget will be this way, but then there's the other part of the budget, which I'll separate out, that will allow us to run more higher deficits, and we'll gather more debt. So he's going to have to put something together and have a budget, I would say, in the spring. I would say it can't go later than May or the end of May. They're going to have to do something to get these the budgetary measures in. Notwithstanding that, in order to do his housing stuff that Brookfield needs done, this has got to come in this spring or summer. So I think there's got to be a budget for Brookfield.
She must have been saying something important again.
There's a CSIS agent outside with a microwave antenna pointing at her.
So,
You
so
know,
on that,
Payman, I think I'm hearing it. I'll say this because it's humorous. From the time I've been very politically active, and I've been that way since I've been early 20s, and I had no filter back then, Payman. Can you imagine what I was like? So I had no filter, and I was in my 20s, and I was full on in Newfoundland politics. And I literally have had a lawyer on retainer for my entire adult life. In the event that I end up in, some particular trouble or another for whatever activities I was doing, and is still there. When myself and Al Chislett, who was the founder or the founder of Voisey's Bay, do you remember the guy who found Voisey's Bay, the biggest nickel deposit in Canada, in Labrador? Yeah, we came together, Peter, do you remember? And we formed the Newfoundland and Labrador Party. So it was Al and myself, and the idea of the party was to protect the resources of Newfoundland and Labrador and have them treated more fairly and deal with Quebec and hydro and all kinds of things. Anyway, it was seen as a potentially separatist party. So I started to get all these clicks and buzzes and everything on my phone. And I said to my lawyer, like, what possibly is happening here? He said, oh, yeah, they probably have a tap, but you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to know. They have to tell you, and they only get so many, hours to do it. And he actually sent somebody, my lawyer, to do the sweep, to check the phone. Anyway, we caught it. But this is in this is my 30s now. Now we're in the real good times, and we're having fun. So I guess I'm probably the most likely of everybody here. RB, I should be with you, I suppose. I should have been locked up 4 or 5 times, but I managed to get get through it okay. But yeah, CSIS is always there, and I've learned from that time forward that that's not a joke. And the reason they claim to be able to do this is if they feel anything is compromising Canadian security or unity, so a separatist party or a separatist movement or something that's deemed to be that or could be that, they have the access in. And, I learned a lesson that day.
Yeah, when I opened a complaint against Justin Trudeau in 2018, CSIS did an op on me for over 12 months. But Saturday night, we did an interview with a guy named Michel Junou Katsuya, who used to be the head of Asia Pacific for CSIS. And we had a chance to interview him and ask him straight up, why are politicians not being marched out and prosecuted? And he was telling us that Pierre Trudeau set up CSIS initially as basically a brown shirt division, that their job was to find information on people that Pierre Trudeau was looking for info on, and that they were only allowed to report to the Minister of Justice and the Prime Minister's office. And then it's up to them to do what they want with it. But their number one directive in CSIS is at no time ever are they to show up in court. And if they're going to be called in to give testimony, that they have to walk away from the case. When they find criminal activity, they can't actually give it directly to the RCMP because the RCMP have to say where it came from. And if it came from CSIS, they have to back away from the case. And that's why Pierre Poilievre wouldn't sign that agreement, because he'd be bound by the Secrecy Act. When CSIS gave them information that said you're sitting amongst a band of thieves, knaves and rogues, he'd have been gag ordered and can't say anything about it. And this Katsuya guy, I mean, he was just straight up. He pulled no punches. He said CSIS has to go, and CSIS has to be removed from reporting to the PMO and to the Minister of Justice, and they have to be able to report and work hand in hand with the police agency. But we also had another guy who was the former head of, for his last 4 years in the RCMP, he was the head of proceeds of crime. And he said the RCMP is now corrupted at all the upper levels. There has to be a major clean sweep of everything inside the RCMP as well. These were two of the top people in Canada in that line of work. Plus we had, at the same time, we had on a Lieutenant General, Michel Maisonneuve, who was saying the same thing. And that all three of them said that if Carney get in, we're heading towards a major crisis in Canada. These are three of the top people in Canada, guys. And they said, we have a major, major problem because of the infiltration, China, corruption. No one will do their job. Judges that have been appointed by the Liberal Party and won't do the job. I mean, it was just, I was stunned. I was just sitting there going, man, this is actually being said out loud.
I want to end it on a good note. Is there a silver lining to this that maybe Carney will blow things up so much that people, even if the country splits up, at least we'll start get some semblance of rule of law?
Is that your positive note, Payman?
I'm sorry. The only positive I can think of is the provinces separate.
I'm
So
sorry.
the only positive thing is what Donald Trump planned. He endorsed Carney, knowing that if Canada elected Carney, Alberta would leave. He'd get access to all the energy and minerals that he wants, and he doesn't have to take on the other parasitic provinces. I mean, I'm just being straight up.
Yeah.
He's going to get everything he wanted, and we're going to get the shaft.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't resist. I mean, with Peter sitting, in Nova Scotia, I've got to tell you, if anyone watched Portapeak, they fully understood that everything is corrupt. If it needed anything more than Portapeak, I don't know how it could have actually needed anything more than that. Nothing more than that needed to be said. And
Sue, I controlled that area for 10 years as a game warden. I gave a bunch of information to the guy who wrote the book 22 Murders, Paul Blango. And I used to patrol in that area. And Leon Jodry, a buddy of mine, apparently committed suicide afterward. And he was the only guy who could completely blow up the entire narrative. And they wouldn't let him testify. They tried to destroy his reputation. And then they said he committed suicide in a house with a generator going. He was dead, but his two dogs were just fine. And the entire thing went away. $59 million. I took that story to another police department, and when I told them the dogs were alive and he was dead, they went, whoa. And they said, Pete, it's out of our jurisdiction. It's an RCMP issue. So you want to talk corruption?
I don't. I mean, when you follow just the basic storyline of that and what took place and what was permitted to take place, and how access to funds were gained and how much money this fellow had and took out, and his repeated reports to the RCMP on his involvement with illegal weapons, as well as the police cars and stuff like that, all of his existence, and then domestic violence. The fellow was, through and through. And to watch an officer get gunned down and to watch the people who died there, if people don't understand that the system is corrupt after that, there's something missing for people. I think they must deliberately put their head in the sand because they don't want to see how bad it is. But certainly after watching that, nobody could claim that the RCMP is working functionally right.
Sue, I want to end it on this, and we'll do round robin. So I'll give the order. But this is a question put from Andre Meloche, former PPC candidate. Derek Sloan has said that 99% of political decisions are made by establishment and that MP is expected to follow the party line. Here's a question for the panelists. Do you believe that the only way for a modern politician to gain power is to succumb to blackmail? And what would be the political strategy to reverse the current trend? Can we avoid an insurrection? Let's go Peter, Sue, Matthew, just me, RB, and then remanded.
Nova Scotia offered a solution, and that was to elect enough independents to sign a performance-based contract with the community who's going to work for them, where they can be held legally accountable for the promises that they make. And if they don't do what they say they're going to do, they can be sued and fired for failing to live up to the terms of a contract. And enough independents can take control and reverse the damage that parties have done, because the party system is categorically broken.
Thank you. Sue?
Brilliant.
Can you, for me, Payman, just slip that back up there again? I want to see the question.
Yeah, basically, it's the only way for a modern politician to gain power is to basically give into the blackmail. What is the strategy to reverse that trend, like the party whip, all of this CSIS RCMP garbage?
I think, and Peter gave some great thoughts there. I believe we're into a system, and this is very, that we represent their constituency. And I think we have to get back to the constituency level politics. When they walk into that House of Commons, they're walking into a party whip. You no longer have a point of view. You no longer represent anyone other than the party. And this is primarily fueled by party politics, which is why what Peter said was so important. The independence of candidates outside of a party is sometimes the only way, in fact, to get the representation where you don't have to go along with blackmail. So you truly are only answerable to your constituents. But there used to be a balance in this. If I go back to the 70s, I'd say that people had the opportunity and they told their politician what they wanted done. And if the politician didn't do it, they were out. And there was a real connection to the people. And that slowly diminished and diminished and diminished. And party politics became stronger and stronger and stronger. And in order for party politics to work at its level that we're seeing now, it's leader down. Everything's controlled within the headquarters and the leader's office. There is no real communication with the constituencies. And the other thing I've found that it's done is our intellectual capacity in the House of Commons has diminished every election for the past, I'll say, 7 elections. We have diminished the quality of our candidates. We've diminished that intellectual part of people who were, like, remember the days of John Crosby, and you guys all know this. You all had your own members that were very outspoken, and they would go at it full on for their province or whatever it was they were doing. And sometimes they voted outside the province. Sometimes they got up and crossed the floor, but they did something. Nowadays, we have these people that essentially act like trained seals. The front bench says something and they sit back and they clap. We literally have members now elected who, when there is a discussion or let's say second reading of a bill and there's debate on the bill, and not everyone shows up in the House, they all go out and have their coffee or do whatever else they're doing. We have backbenchers now who are basically employed to sit behind the person who's speaking to show that it looks like there's more people in the House than are actually in the House. That's how far down we've fallen. We are no longer attracting, and that's why, Payman, I gave you the kudos that I did. I felt there was an intellectual in the room, an independent in the room, somebody with critical thought, someone that had integrity. And we haven't seen that in a very long time. So parties now, when they're choosing their candidates, choose wisely and they choose dumb. That's exactly what they do.
All right,
Wow.
thanks, Sue. Matthew, go ahead. Same question. I'll bring it up.
I'm humbled by these analysis, and I would concur that, first of all, that since the 1970s, when Pierre Trudeau was really a globalist, and he started bringing that into politics, and at the same time, everything started, going the way you're talking about, hierarchical and top down, and also Peter's comments about the accountability done through a group of independents with a contract with the people that elected them, for which their performance was measured. And if they broke the contract, then they were not going to get elected again. That is the ultimate connection of the responsibilities and behavior of the politician with the people, and it's a direct connection. It's explicit. That's the only way. I saw, as far as I can tell. I actually had some thoughts about this myself, and I came out to think, if we just had a lot of independence and we held them to, the candidates to a standard of contractual standard, that's democracy. That's fantastic, and I think that we have to do that. Given what's happened, we're in a situation where if we're going to dig ourselves out of it, it has to be that you have to have accountability, complete accountability, and get rid of all this corruption. Absolutely. I think that there's a lot more work to do. And I think that there's a lot of discussions that need to be had, and I think we need to get more people involved in proposing these solutions and make them happen, because it's absolutely needed. We're at the end of the run here if we don't make these changes. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Matthew. Jamie, you're up next. I'll bring up the question.
Well, I go to that question and I think most politicians, in my view, are corrupt in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through a bribe, whether through a friend doing a friend a favor, we're buddies outside of here. I think there's corruption found at every level. But I will tell you that two chicks in politics have been created to hold this government to account, and whatever government follows them. And we're out on a mission, which we're not going to stop. We're going to be relentless until we hold them accountable. Targeting the 343, doing individual targeted campaigns will be effective. And I have every confidence in that.
Thanks, Jamie. RB, I'll unmute you since you're driving. Go ahead, you're unmuted.
Thanks. Somebody has to DM me that two chicks in politics link, because I want to really, I'd like to be able to listen to that, and that sounds great. I'd like to be a guest on the show sometime. But as far as we need electoral reform across the board, we need an elected Senate. We should make it illegal. Party whip should be illegal. Every member should be able to vote his conscience on any bill, and I don't know how you get that through. And we also have to get the Prime Minister's office. We have to take away their executive control. There's no checks and balances in our system, and like you said, you have CSIS and the RCMP basically as organs of the state, of whoever's in power at the time. It's absolutely corrupt beyond all belief. And as far as the blackmail thing go, I have a little story about our Premier Scott Moe about 20, 30 years ago. When he was a young man. Before he was involved in politics, there was a hit and run incident where somebody lost their life, and it was covered up, and he might have been drunk at the time. And then after that, all of a sudden he became this politician that had all this power out of nowhere. And you kind of wonder, he's being told what to do, and he can only go so far, and he can't actually be independent because he's got something hanging over his head. That's all I have to say about that. But yeah, we need electoral reform. It's the most important thing we need to do, because our system is so corrupt. It's why 40% of people don't vote. It's why all through my social media when I was running here, the BBC, I have a lot of friends who, online friends who've been following me for years, because I'm one of those, those people who do their own research. They call us conspiracy theorists. And so I have a lot of people in that world that have given up on voting. They're blackpilled. They think it's all a scam. And they were really mad at me for running for office. And they were just hammering me. Oh, what are you voting for? It's the whole vote. You're playing the game, RB. What's going on? And so what kind of a democracy are you going to have if almost half the populace says it's all a scam? What's the point? We need to do something, or else there's no point in having this guy. Thanks.
Good point. I'll mute you. Don't worry about it. You're driving, so you're muted. Thanks, RB. Remanded, you're up next. I don't know if you remember the question.
Yeah. I got it there. Yeah, I mean, I can't say I have the most or a lot of knowledge on the blackmail within politicians. You can kind of just guess, and you'd probably be on point. One of the I really liked what RB brought up, which triggered some thought on electoral reform, and that goes into accountability. One thing that Sue said yesterday that I wanted to comment on, but I lost connection, was that when the chief electoral officer, and sorry to relate things back to the BC election, but it's a good example. When they came out with their statement of vote, they basically said at the bottom of their statement that even though everything's final, There may be instances where they'll edit, and any changes will be uploaded onto the website. So even when you come to a final conclusion into who has been elected to form government, and you come up with malfeasance or facts or evidence that something's gone wrong, they've still found a way to kind of wiggle out of it. So that kind of leads down the path of public oversight. The United States has public oversight in their elections, and where they publish their results for public oversight for citizens to say, you know what, is this right? And maybe that goes into the discussion of like things like constitutional reform, and where judges are elected, RCP chiefs are elected, and so it's kind of, it brings it back down to the public and being involved in civic duty, where these people can actually be held accountable. And until you get things like being able to recall MPs at the federal level, the 343 now are really only accountable to themselves. And in some instance, I would think that there's also blackmail within each other. It would be like, well, we have the majority vote, and if you don't play ball, we're going to vote you out. I mean, that doesn't happen too often, but I mean, that's the only play in the playbook. And so there's nothing really there for the citizens to grab onto. And that's probably a good side quest into, there's only 2 provinces in Canada that can actually recall their MLAs, in BC and Alberta. And even with that being said, the threshold to even have your MLAs accountable for anything they've done wrong is so high that it's almost a non-starter. So I think, yeah, electoral reform, and then maybe you work on constitutional reform, and then maybe the public can actually get somewhere. Maybe that's a good way to land it.
Thanks, Remanded. I'll quickly say none of this matters unless we have an educated voter. If we have low information voters, we're just going to get low information politicians. Sue, you wanted to mention something, and then we'll end it. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to do this payment, right? I mean, how am I supposed to listen to all this and not do that? RB, we'd love to have you on the program, first of all, and anyone else here. I'd love to have Matthew on. I'd love to have Peter on. And you're always welcome, payment, as is Remanded. I have to say that we didn't talk about one thing that was very clear. We talked about bribery, and we talked about this and that, but we didn't talk about compromised politicians. And I fear that in the Western world, we have an awful lot of compromised politicians. We have an awful lot of people we have no idea whose thumb they're under from whatever it was they did and they were caught doing. And it is clearly out there, not only in the corporate sector, but in the political sector as well. And on the Senate, we all know that a Triple E Senate, which is what, in fact, a liberal Newfoundland premier recommended during Meech, Triple E Senate, give the province equal elected and effective Senate. So no matter what province you're in, no matter what the population base is, you've got an equal number of senators, as they do in the United States. They're elected and they have direct input. And if Ontario and Quebec are truly serious about bringing this country together and having a confederation that works, that Triple E Senate would go a long way to do that. They are the ones that would be holding out on that, not the rest of the provinces. And it should be absolutely considered. But the whole business and insurrection was part of that question, and no one went to that, and that's probably unfair. I'll say that I've always had the belief that we can think our way out of anything. And to your point, Payman, an educated electorate is a good electorate. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to continue to do what we do, continue to connect to one another, continue to support one another, be together in spaces or podcasts or whatever it takes to do, so that the social platform media grows and that information, factual information, can be out and shared. And the dilemmas that we face we can find proper solutions to. We can think our way out of anything. But we have to be together to do that.
Sorry,
That's too
the
funny.
last sentence and a half didn't make it.
Sue, can you start over from the beginning? We lost the last 4 seconds.
Oh, well, all I said is we all have to be together to accomplish this. We all have to commit to continue to be together. This group here and the others that are not here tonight, but you know, do the regular. Very important. Everyone brings something real to this discussion. And what I really love about it is we're hitting coast to coast every time. We are going across this country and we are getting good representation from every province. And we're starting to talk to one another. And this is what's going to make the difference. I mean, take some solace out of the fact that the children of our country voted in a minority conservative government under their civics engagement this election. They voted in a conservative minority. So they didn't go with a liberal minority. That's the children of our country. And know that we owe proper civics and information and dialogue to them. And I think if we educate further that way and move our discussion more to the intellectual level instead of the rhetoric and the nonsense of the political level, that we do have a hope to keep this country together and to let it grow.
All right. Well, thank you,
Excellent.
Sue. A big thank you to the audience members, Peter, Matthew, Sue, Jamie, RB, Remanded. I very much appreciate your time. And until the next time.
Nice to be on, guys. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
By the way, I posted my email down there if any of you guys want to reach me.
All right, we'll broadcast that out. So you guys
Oh,
getting hate
not to
mail.
you guys. I mean, just to these guys here, right? Man, I'll be swamped. Anyways,
Thank you,
look,
Peter.
thanks. Yeah, you bet, Matthew, Remanded, RB, Jamie, and thanks again, Payman. Appreciate it. I'm supposed to be somewhere else in 7 minutes.
Best of luck.
Anyway,
Thanks,
Goodbye, everyone.
Payman. It was a great show.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Bye.
much,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.